at the moment. So just to say a quick hello, I am Kimberly Mitchell. I work for Smart Data Foundry, which is part of Finds. And just to go through a little bit of housekeeping today. So the session today will be recorded, and we will pass the slides out after the event. If everyone can use the Q&A for actually submitting questions, it just allows us to track them a bit better. And if there's any problems with audio or visuals, then let me know in the chat. And I think that's probably it for housekeeping. We'll try and answer questions as we go along, and the Q&A session will be at the end if you've got any sort of meatier questions that we don't answer as we're going along. So just to introduce Oliver Berry, he'll be taking you through everything today. So I'm just going to sort of lurk in the background and make sure everything runs all right. So I'll pass over to you, Ollie. Thanks.
Thanks, Kimberly. Hi, I'm Oliver Berry. I'm the Research Coordinator at Finds and also Smart Data Foundry. And thank you all for joining today. I want to start today with a question. And the main question is, can I get PowerPoint to cooperate? No, the main question is a simple question, which is, what can we understand about the economy if we could actually see how money moves from day to day? And that's not just what people say in surveys or what shows up in official statistics, weeks or months or even years after what's actually happened, but what's actually happening in real time in people's finances. We know that we're reaching a point where novel data is becoming a really exciting concept, bringing in all this different smart data from a variety of sources, including the private sector. And it can take us sort of leaps and bounds beyond what traditional data has taken us to a certain point. And we're not just talking about the economy, we're talking about how the economy affects everything. This isn't just for economists that this is becoming useful, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it. The economy is relevant to all of us, and seeing how this money moves is something that can really enhance research in a variety of fields. So I want to introduce a little bit about what Financial Data Service is. So with a Financial Data Service, or FINDS, we are part of a UKRI infrastructure investment, and we're a 3-year project that began in January 2025. That investment is the Smart Data Research UK data service. We're one of 6 data services that Smart Data Research maintain at different universities across the UK. And the Financial Data Service is sort of a core part of what Smart Data Foundry now does. So we're very keen on supporting academic researchers into the root causes of poverty, inequality, and economic well-being, and sort of using some of this data that we've brought in from the private sector. What's mentioned here is sort of our cornerstone data set of 5 million de-identified consumer bank accounts, providing secure access to this de-identified financial data from millions of British bank account customers and thousands of UK SMEs to sort of help generate really vital, crucial, forward-thinking research. So what does this research mean, and what does this research look like in action? Firstly, understand what we can research. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the data sources that we have look like. So firstly, I'm going to talk about the core source data of consumer finance. So Smart Data Foundry has had data feeds of consumer transactions since mid-2019, before we were even really Smart Data Foundry, and when we were other things entirely. And this sort of stemmed from the great collaboration between NatWest Group and the University of Edinburgh. But what back then was sort of sporadic and inconsistent has, over time, as we've built and developed this really strong relationship with a data partner, become this automated, curated, really strong quality checked longitudinal data set. Goes all the way back to May 2019. We get it updated weekly, showing the previous week. The churn of new and leaving customers is typically less than 5%. It becomes this really strong, really useful data set that actually allows us to look at what is going on specifically in people's finances. I want to clarify at this point, this is all completely de-identified. Each customer is effectively anonymized, and everything is contained within detailed subcategories. So we're not drilling down into sort of looking very specifically at who shopped at Tesco at 4 p.m. on a Wednesday and who's gone to the pub on 7 p.m. on a Friday. We're not interested in sort of those very granular transactions, because that then can become sort of a little bit intrusive. What we're interested in really is how this data can show really interesting and clear trends in real time. So the data, as you said earlier, contains approximately 5 million randomly sampled NatWest customers in Great Britain. Unfortunately, we don't have data for Northern Ireland, with a really strong representation in Scotland due to the historical strength of RBS, which is obviously a key part of NatWest's sort of range of brands. NatWest ensure that the data is just really consistent and useful to us. And now I'll talk a little bit more about what we can actually see with this data. So the data includes sort of the things you want to see and expect in the data in terms of income. So we can see salary, benefits, pension. We can also see a little bit of things like bonus income, sort of more granular looks at benefits, and also some things that would normally be omitted in terms of understanding incomes like investment income, interest income that go into an account. We can see general cash balances. We can see when accounts are overdrawn. We have sort of a limited range of demographics that are still very useful. These come directly from the bank as sex, data zone, or LSOA, if you're in England and Wales, and age bands, 5-year age bands that go all the way from 18 to 20, 20 to 24, all the way up to 85 plus. So we can really, without knowing who the person is in the data, get a good idea of who could be affected in terms of the type of person, the persona of person that can be affected within the data, when we want to investigate things like economic shocks or other aspects that may be relevant to research and policymakers. What we get is sort of a whole picture view, and this is what's also very unique about this data is we don't just get the income, we get the expenditure out of the data, whether that's committed expenditure, mortgage rent, council tax, utility bills, or discretionary expenditure in clothing, travel, and entertainment. So I will talk about some of the more examples of research that we can do with this later. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the other aspect of what we do, which is not consumer data, it is business data. The small medium business data that we get is provided by Sage, who are a major cloud accounting provider. The data is curated by us, and this stemmed out of a relationship where we would help them create these monthly or quarterly reports looking at workforce and performance. The data is derived from raw Sage customer data on workforce, payroll, invoices, cash flow, expenditure, profit and loss, all sorts of really interesting things that we want to know about SMBs. These are anonymized, so again, we're not trying to drill into who is doing these things specifically, but to understand sort of the really useful and interesting trends of what's going on. They're classified and aggregated to monthly and quarterly summaries before we receive them. So, as I said, there's 3 regular outputs of this that we do. These are the SME Pulse reports that we publish with CEBR, and 3 micro data sets. So when I say micro data set, I'll come on to this in a little bit. That's data that's available as microdata. So this is data that's available in a secure, trusted research environment, as opposed to aggregated data, which is data that we have aggregated into useful statistics for people to just request access to, in more of a simple thing. So more granular detail on the fields used in this data set and the previous data set will be available by requesting access to the data sets using the QR code that will be present at the end of this presentation. So don't feel like you have to absorb everything now. Everything will be available in our data catalog and on the portal online. Just a little bit more about some of the fields that are available in this data. So, like I said, revenue, expenditure, profit, cash balances, invoices, VAT data, which is really useful for understanding sort of a business's financial year and how that functions, payroll data, as well as location and 2-digit SIC codes that identify the industry. So we obviously get this data in from data partners in terms of sort of raw data. Obviously, it's not completely raw. Some of it's been aggregated to a certain extent, so it's more usable. Sort of a unique quirk about getting smart data in from the private sector means that this is data that's not being created for research purposes. So it can have all sorts of things going on with it that are weird and wacky, and make it quite difficult at an initial point when it's in its raw state to use in research terms. So something that we do and we really focus on is ensuring we work with data partners to make sure that this data is actually usable and translatable to an academic or research setting. And beyond that, once it gets to that point, that it's also usable and translatable to the settings of the people who are sort of gatekeepers and change makers, from sort of local to regional to national governmental levels. So we can use this to actually influence really useful and sensible policy change with the decisions that we come to make. So this means that I'm not just giving raw data as what I do. We've turned this data into useful data sets. These are available to look at in our data catalog. There's currently 23 on there, 12 of which are microdata and 11 of which are aggregated data. So for the aggregated data, all you need to do is create a login so we know who you are, and request to access it, and you can start playing about with that data as and when. But if you want to drill into it at a deeper level, that will be within the trusted research environment. These data sets aren't just curated so they're useful. We try and curate them so we're adding even more onto the data that people might want to investigate. So these are key themes like income volatility, where we can create fields that will allow you easy access to see whether how frequently people are paid and how much pay varies, so you can investigate more deeply things like the gig economy. We can look at specific income and spending patterns, indicators of economic well-being. So are people consistently spending beyond their means? Are people consistently dipping into their overdraft? They have very minimal cash balances that shows poor resilience. And all the other things around on the business area, sort of small business activity. So looking at how cash flows can be keenly affected by different economic changes and different circumstances that may occur throughout either a regular year or, as I was saying in another workshop yesterday, that we haven't had a regular year for quite some time in terms of avoiding various economic shocks. So what they have looked like over time. This is continuing to grow. We've got some exciting new data sets that we're developing with additional indicators. So looking at benefit uptake, housing, and fuel poverty data sets that are going to be coming in the coming months. And we're always excited to talk to researchers and try and understand what we can do with our data to make it more useful to you and work with you to build new data sets that you think will really help build strong research and impact off the back of that. And there are a lot of interesting things about the data, but the important thing isn't just what's in the data set, it's what it allows you to ask. It's very crucial to understand that it's not about replacing traditional data, but complementing it to get a more comprehensive view. Whether that's using sort of survey-based research to ensure that we're still bringing in the qualitative aspect, or using sort of previous quantitative government compiled statistics and combining it with this sort of data that has much less of a time lag to ensure that we're able to respond with speed and accuracy to emerging problems. So consider this, with these data sets, we can move beyond simply knowing what average income is to examining how stable that income might be over time. In a traditional data set, where we've got a single data point for an individual saying they earn X amount per year, we can see that actually maybe that income varies seasonally, and that they're earning a lot more in the summer months and struggling to stretch that through the winter months. So that stability can significantly impact financial planning and policy making. Similarly, instead of just tracking spending, we can identify where financial pressures emerge first, offering early indicators of potential hardship. This is especially relevant over the context of the past couple of years, where we've seen geopolitical events and other events sort of act as very quick precursors to large inflationary rises and cost of living crisis. So being able to identify that and knowing how those sorts of crises develop is invaluable for devising timely interventions and trying to mitigate sort of the worst effects of that. And finally, it's not just about regional trends, but how these play out at a much more local level, because the data we have can drill down as far as a data zone level, or NSOA again. We can really enable very targeted community support. So we're never talking about just talking to sort of national UK government on this, but actually drilling down and working from perhaps more of a bottom-up angle with local authorities, subnational governments, and trying to figure out how we can really help people on that local and individual level. So I'm going to talk about some case studies now, and hopefully that will further bring to light some of the opportunities that this data presents. The first one I'm going to talk about is a piece of work we're doing for the Scottish Government, which is using a smart financial data to improve labour market statistics. So the case study is highlighting sort of the growing challenge with traditional labour market data. You may be aware, you may not. The ONS has a labour force survey, which is used to try and capture labour market data, but that has been seeing very declining response rates to the point where in Scotland in 2023, they weren't even able to really publish results because there was so much missing data or unusable data in the responses to that survey. And this really matters because the statistics underpin major policy decisions from economic planning to welfare and skills investment. So if the data is delayed or unreliable, the decisions that we are trying to make happen without a clear or current view of what's actually happening. So through Finds, we've been working with the Scottish Government to explore a different approach. And this is focused primarily now on the consumer banking data we hold. And hopefully, if successful, we can expand this to the whole of Great Britain and also see if we can bring in some of the business data we hold. So using this large de-identified sample, we've been looking at income flows, which gives us a direct view of who's being paid, especially including those who are in more irregular or informal work who might be missed in surveys because they're not properly captured in the data that those surveys are trying to maintain just through sort of quite rigid questions about number of employees and how much they're being paid. This opens up a lot of new possibilities, understanding how many people are receiving income from employment, tracking changes in employment and unemployment as they happen, and sort of identifying regional patterns in economic activity. We can already see some things. Scotland is obviously a place with quite a variety of different job types, especially in the Highlands and Islands, where the work becomes much more seasonal. The implications of that become quite clear when we're looking at the labour market statistic. Again, we're not trying to replace the labour force survey completely, but to try and complement it, to bring it with some more timely insights and more local detail and a more resilient evidence base overall. And ultimately, if it works, we can transform how we produce labour market statistics, which just helps policymakers make faster and better informed decisions based on what's really happening in the economy right now. As we know, everything can change sort of on a knife edge in the economy based on either things that happen within the country or out of the country. It's definitely prevalent in the news recently. So being able to have that near real-time view is so much more useful than just having a survey that happens once a year and takes some time to process and work on. So we can tackle these things at a much faster pace, which will benefit everyone. In terms of more direct research projects, we're working with Professor Juvengro Bukunle at the University of Edinburgh Business School. So GB is an SDR UK fellow. So SDR UK have also been working not just on the data services, but to promote smart data research in general. And they run sort of a great fellowship program. I think around 15 fellows are all looking at different aspects of smart data off the back of that. So he's looking specifically at financial vulnerability and economic hardship. And using anonymized transaction data from us, it's tracking how shocks like rising housing, energy, and council tax costs affect people's financial resilience in real time. So the key is understanding how vulnerability builds over time and not just capturing sort of a single moment, but trying to figure out and understand from the data what the precursors to that are. And that gives better opportunities to not just policymakers, but also financial services to get the insight they need to step in earlier and respond more effectively. I was talking to a colleague from the FCA yesterday who said, well, they've got a real drive to make sure that financial services firms are able to understand when they have vulnerable customers. But a lot of these firms don't understand what vulnerability looks like. So if we're able to show that to them, then they can help develop products and interventions that can sort of help people before they get to a point where they're requiring sort of governmental support or other support, or we can direct them earlier to governmental support and other support. So it just opens up a whole wealth more options for actually being able to help people before problems go really severe and it becomes a lot more difficult for everyone involved. The next case study I would like to talk about is a piece of work we've done with the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. I mentioned earlier talking about income volatility. This is something that's just really fascinating to us and something we can see very keenly in the data. It's not just an economic issue. It has knock-on effects across health, housing, education, and employment. As I mentioned earlier, I gave the example, and I will talk about this in the next case study as well, is if you're earning a lot of money, perhaps seasonally in the summer months, and we know that there is a lot of summer seasonal work across Scotland, across Britain in general, then being able to stretch that money and being able to rely and accurately plan what your next year is going to be becomes very difficult. And if you've earned all your money in the summer and you're struggling to afford your heating in the winter, then that really will have a knock-on effect on sort of your health and housing quality. So through this project with Joseph Rowntree Foundation, we developed what we call the income volatility infrastructure. This was both a combination of a dashboard, which is freely available to look at, and useful microdata. We've curated specific events such as looking at levels of income variability, volatility, known salary events, and average incomes to really enable researchers to better understand the impacts of this variance. So this is much more about giving sort of a more current, realistic view of how people's incomes are actually fluctuating and sort of what that means in practice. And then, yes, I mentioned earlier that the economy is this great amorphous thing, but it really does affect all of us. And then that means it can have these huge knock-on effects across housing, education, employment. And one thing that we're really interested in finds is the effects on health. So we've been working with Dr. Olivia Swan at the Usher Institute. Livy is a Wellcome Trust funded researcher, a paediatrician, and just a great scientist. And she's been working on the Homes Heat and Healthy Kids project. So this is a collaboration we've been doing with Usher and the Wellcome Trust. And this brings together a variety of really interesting data sources, of which financial data is just one aspect. Also combining with health data, energy data, and housing data to provide this really interesting, useful context to understand how the conditions that children grow up in affect their health. So the focus is here on something that's very real: underheated or poorly ventilated homes, how they contribute to respiratory infections in young children. You can see here from the quote from Livy is that respiratory infections are the main reason for hospital admission in preschool children, and they can have real lifelong consequences, increasing the risk of asthma and premature adult death. And she noticed this through her work as a paediatrician, really noticing sort of the sheer number of children that she would see on sort of a weekly basis who are struggling with these issues. But by linking these different data sources, the projects can really help quantify that impact and then inform the practical policy recommendations to reduce these inequalities. And something that it can pick up is not even that all homes are poorly heated, but looking at sort of unintended consequences of just rushing to policy solutions, which is retrofitting all homes and then realizing that that may still result in poor ventilation. And generally, this is even when the government has intervened, ensuring that they can intervene in the right way using this continually updated, useful data to make sure that unintended consequences are then being mitigated and we really are creating the strong impact that we want to create. So I hope these examples, even I've probably whizzed through them, have given you a good idea of what we can do with the data and really tried to bring it to life. And I hope off the back of that, you are interested in accessing this data. So I'll talk a little bit about how we go about that. The data is stored in a trusted research environment that's managed in partnership with EPCC, the Edinburgh Parallel Computing Centre. Some people know these as secure research environments or safe havens, but essentially this is a really secure, well-maintained air-gapped space that you would access via a virtual machine, and you wouldn't be able to copy paste, screen share, or do anything out of that. So a very secure area where you could access, manipulate the data, and only egress well-checked aggregated exports. So we follow the 5 safes. We operate under the same safeguard as ADR UK. EPCC maintain on a very similar architecture to RTRE, the trusted research environment for NHS Scotland data and a variety of other really sensitive data sources. So we know it's super secure, we know it's super up to date and super well maintained. Particularly, I'm talking about what you can see here as secure data. So this is the microdata if you want to get your hands on that and look at things at a really local, granular level. We also have 2 other options of available gaining access to data, and these are safeguarded and open. So open data is visible and easy to see on the website. That's just things that are aggregated to a national level, so really safe data. And the safeguarded data is available with approval by the data catalogue. So these are either via curated data sets or they're things like our Economic Wellbeing Explorer or the Income Volatility Dashboard that I just mentioned earlier. So the data is still very aggregated here and very secure, either into things. So we just need to check essentially who you are so we can sort of understand that you're working for a research organisation with a for good purpose. The for good purpose sort of underpins everything we're trying to do here. We're not trying to make this data available for anything that wouldn't be served in the public interest. So that's sort of the reasoning for doing things that way. In terms of applying to access the trusted research environment, we try to make it as simple a process as possible. There is an application form on our website. It just asks you to include as much detail as possible about the project, the data you're hoping to access. And what's key to us is that you justify why you need this data for this project and how that will specifically enhance the research work you're doing. And that ensures that we're in touch with everything that we need to do in terms of data minimization and other sort of legal requirements there. We then assess your proposal. Our team of data scientists and our data manager will check that we think that the data is actually suitable for answering the research questions that you want to do. They know this data better than anyone else because they work with it every single day. So we're pretty confident that they will be able to advise you on the best way to proceed. Then, of course, we undergo information governance, data ethics check, and we ask for a DBS or disclosure check to further safeguard the data. There's a little bit of mandatory training that you must do to understand your responsibilities when accessing the TRE. And then once that's all complete, this process normally can take 3 to 4 months, but then access will be granted to the TRE and your research project can begin. So hopefully that is clear, and hopefully I have whetted your appetite to access this data and given you some ideas on some of the projects and possibilities that we could do to take it forwards. I will show the little QR code here so you can go directly to our portal. If you haven't got an account already, you will need to make one. and log in, but it's a free account just by scanning this QR code. And then once you're in, you can explore the full range of data sets in the catalogue, much more there than what I was able to talk about today. So I'd really encourage you to take a deep dive into it, explore what's there, and apply for access if something sparks your interest. Because we are an SDR UK funded data service for proof of concept projects, this data is free to access at point of use. If we're working on larger projects, then we can discuss sort of the resource requirements there. But for proof of concept for investigating things, we're really happy that we can make this data available to you to conduct your research work. And we're really keen to see the ideas that you come up with and what comes out of that. So I'm going to stop talking now and open the floor up to some questions.
So if you want to pop your hand up, I can unmute you. I can't unmute everyone, unfortunately. If you want to stick your hand up and ask a question, I can allow you to ask that out loud. Meanwhile, Ollie, we've had quite a few questions in the Q&A that Charlotte has answered as we're going along. I just wondered if maybe we want to expand on any of these. So we had a question about Scottish Government labour market workforce with NatWest and RBS, and the fact that they might have an older profile because younger customers are more likely to use challenger banks. Will be thoughts about that?
Yeah, so this is an interesting thing that we talk about with the data. Aside from 18 to 20-year-olds as an age category where it just becomes a little bit difficult to incorporate them into the data, we actually have still a pretty good representative range of all age bands beyond that, say 20 to 24-year-olds, 25 to 29-year-olds. So the people you would expect to typically use challenger banks. The thing is, with a lot of young people, is yes, there is a high uptake of the use of challenger banks, but generally that's for more of a specific purpose, whether that's day-to-day spending or other things. A lot of people still do have sort of a conventional, traditional bank account. So enough people, young people have them that we're still able to capture them as a well-represented sample within the data. So yeah, there are some issues with that. They may be choosing not to be paid into those accounts. They may not be using them for specific direct debits or usual spending. But everyone, literally everyone, you ask a room of 10 people how they use their different bank accounts and you'll get 15 different answers. So what's really useful about the data we have is because it's such a large sample size and because it works on this longitudinal basis, trends are still really useful and visible at that statistical level. So that sort of helps smooth out any oddities that we may encounter in the data there.
Perfect. I have a question from Claudia about whether Python is still a prerequisite to access the data.
Not if you can use R.
That was a nice simple one.
So accessing the data in a trusted research environment, it is a very computational, crazy environment. I don't go in it if I can avoid it. Yes, so it's got a Unix command line to navigate around. That's relatively self-explanatory. We would typically what is freely available in the trusted research environment is the use of Python or R. We can enable Starter to be used in the research environment, but that requires a license, bears cost. But if you are working with a funded research project and we can afford that cost, then yeah, we can bring in other data manipulation softwares into the research environment without too much hassle.
And we've had quite a detailed question that's asking about the age banding in the data and whether we'd ever have anything more granular than the 5-year age bands.
So we don't have anything more granular than the 5-year age bands. That is just a prerequisite of ensuring that we are not being unnecessarily disclosive with the data. And I appreciate what you say about the question on having less detailed information on geography to ensure it remains non-disclosive. So that is potentially a conversation that we could have with the data partner to see if they could provide a data set that would do that, but then that data set would go through different pipelines. So it's possible, but it would be a long process because we would have to keep those data sets completely separate and use different pseudo identifiers to ensure that there would be no overlap there, because otherwise we would increase the risk of re-identifiability of individuals in that data.
Ollie, do you want to stop screen sharing just so we can? Yeah. So there's another one on the Q&A. That is there any mechanism to assess potential household income and expenditure flows from the data, i.e. couples who both have NatWest accounts or joint accounts?
Oh, no, is the simple answer. We have a number of data, a number of individuals in the data that have identical rows, different demographics. So we're aware that those are joint accounts. We don't have a specific flag for joint accounts. NatWest are reluctant to give us that specific flag for joint accounts. And we don't know who is in the same household. That is probably the biggest limitation of the data, that it's all purely at an individual level. But that's very necessary to ensure that it stays de-identified and so useful there. So yeah, there are, again, as I said, there's enough people in the data that we can still work out useful, interesting trends without specifically looking at households. And there are sort of a number of things we could do by combining with other data sources and survey-based data that would give us an indication of how households function, which we can then use to caveat what we see in the data in terms of normally in certain households of this makeup, there would be X number of children, X number of, and this person in this partnership would manage this aspect of the finances, and the other person would manage this aspect of the finances. But generally, what we see in most of the accounts is activity in both the income and expenditure categories. So we have ways of trying to work out that these are main accounts, that they're being used for, if not every single category, that they are being used as both income receiving and expenditure giving accounts. So yeah, it's not all about shoving everything into one joint account and using that for bills, but it goes back to what I said earlier about sort of the heterogeneity of how we all use our finances, our financial services differently, but that gets smoothed out by the large sample sizes.
Okay, we don't actually have any open questions, and everyone seems fairly satisfied. Unless there's anything else for the room, we'll just give it a second. I think we've addressed everyone's questions. If there is anything that you do think of that you want answered, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can get us through email, you can get us through the contact form on the website, and there's a way to ask any questions that you might think of later. As I've said, the slides and the recording will be sent out after this, so if you want to review anything, then please feel free. But if that's everything today, I think we'll just stop there. Thank you very much, Ollie, for answering everyone's questions and running us through everything.
All right, thank you.
Right.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you.